In this video, we'll thoroughly examine the 2003 Hulk movie game. Together, we'll walk through the game's story and discuss things like Easter eggs, references, behind-the-scenes details, and even hear from lead designer Eric Holmes, who was kind enough to let me interview him about his time working on the game, and he provided some really cool details that I'm excited to discuss. But to properly examine this game, we first need to start at the beginning with its development. Vivendi Universal published it, while Radical Entertainment won the right to develop. The story leading up to that is actually quite interesting and involves a cancelled game. Eric Holmes told me a bit about those origins, but I should emphasize that this was before he was hired, so he's mostly passing on info that he had heard.
I joined Radical in 2001. They had just come off of a game which was cancelled. It's an interesting story for cancellation because I'm not sure how much information there is out there for it. I never even played the game. I'm operating on information that was given to me by other people who were on the project because I joined that team. And it was a game based on the Steven Spielberg AI movie. That Radical team was set up for what they had been told was going to be a sci-fi Steven Spielberg robot-based movie, and somehow they found themselves making a brawling game. But they didn't, everything was very secretive about the movie. So then the movie comes out before the game is done, and I think everyone realized how far away they had got away from what that movie was. And I think that project was cancelled within a week or two of that movie coming out. Because also, that movie struggled at the box office, if I remember right. But that's where Radical was. So Radical had technology for fighting, and it had animation pipelines, and it had ways to script combat and abilities. And they spun that into a pitch. This is before I joined. They spun that into a pitch for a Hulk game and put together a very quick demo, I think, of Hulk just fighting some thugs on a rooftop. And there was a couple of physics objects, and they had a pitch, and they went to Vivendi Universal, who had the rights, and won the contract to make the game. And that's when somehow I got hooked in, because I was looking for work around that time. And when I was talking to Radical, they're like, "You seem like a comic book guy. You seem like you're into action games." And I'm like, "Yeah." So I ended up getting assigned onto that project.
Eric also described two games that were influential on Radical's Hulk 1. The first is Neversoft Spider-Man, and we'll discuss the second in the gameplay section of this video.
I think there's two games that really taught us a lot about what we could have and should have done with the Hulk game. And so the two games for me that felt like they informed the game the most were the Neversoft Spider-Man game.
Oh yeah.
Which was an absolutely killer breakout superhero game. I think it was a genre maker, right? Completely.
Oh yeah.
Very strong sense of immersion in the world, tons of characters, a whole litany of cameos, and it felt really on brand, right from the title screen with the Spider-Man kind of surf style song. It had a great energy, it was funny, and it was really like the comics. So that was a great reference point. And that was a PS1 game. So then, we weren't shipping on PS1, we were a PS2 game. So it was like, okay, what can we take from that, and how can we interpret lessons from that and then figure out what that would mean for the Hulk.
Eric also shared some really cool unused ideas and cameos relating to the wider Marvel universe that we'll discuss towards the end of our story walkthrough. But already at this early stage, it's clear to me that Radical really wanted to bring the Hulk to life, not even just in relation to the film, but also with an emphasis on the comics. One of my favorite aspects about this game is actually how much it pulls from the comics, despite it being tied to the film. In fact, the story even takes place 1 year after the events of the movie, giving Radical and their game scriptwriter Jeff Hood the opportunity to tell a more original story. So next, let's start digging into the game itself. Since we'll be talking about the movie and the influential comics at the time, I want to put a spoiler warning out for both the film, as well as a general warning for comics authored by Peter David and Paul Jenkins, since those will be discussed prominently. However, I'm making a point to avoid Immortal Hulk spoilers, since I think there's a higher likelihood that some of you will be reading that currently. It's also a more recent Hulk story, so I want to focus more on what was in existence at the time, even though Immortal Hulk does circle back to a lot of these topics. I'd highly recommend reading it though, it's a great Hulk series. As we enter the next section of the video, I also want to mention that I'm going to let the opening cutscene play out in its entirety before we discuss it. There's no dialogue, so I was tempted to narrate over it, but I want you to get a good feel for the tone the game is trying to set from the start. So without further ado, let's see what Radical gave us with the story of the Hulk movie game. Before getting into the action, there are a few things about this opening cinematic that I want to look at. As I mentioned earlier, this game takes place 1 year after the events of the movie, making it, in a way, the movie sequel that we never got. If you haven't seen the movie recently, or at all for that matter, it ends with Bruce on the run, hiding out in South America. In my couple playthroughs of the game, I didn't hear any voice lines referencing it, but I did find a couple recordings in the audio files where Bruce and another character mention South America.
My time in South America was an escape, but I have to continue my research. Science is my only chance.
It's a shame that you were forced into hiding. South America, was it? Soon you won't have to hide anymore.
To be fully transparent, some lines during gameplay seem to be randomized, so those might not necessarily be cut lines, but it's at least how I heard them. Outside of this though, that year in between the movie and the game isn't really referenced, so things pretty much pick up directly with the cutscene we watched. Speaking of which, the first thing that stood out to me was that the gas station Bruce enters is named Kirby's Fueling Station. No doubt this is a nod to Jack Kirby, who illustrated the original Hulk comics. The next thing that stood out to me was the cel-shaded art style, which I think looks very impressive. This style was a tremendous choice, since the game itself is pulling from both the live-action movie and the comic book. I think it beautifully blends the two while also looking unique in its own right. On the topic of visuals, I really love the mirror scene too. It's of course based on the moment that the movie popularized, where Hulk reaches out to Banner from the bathroom mirror. However, the comics did it first, but not with Hulk exactly. Instead, it's Bruce Banner being antagonized by another inner persona of his, the Devil Hulk, which we'll discuss more in Radical's follow-up game, Hulk Ultimate Destruction. Something cool about the game's version of this scene is the way the lighting shifts from daylight to dark as Hulk emerges from the mirror, and then daylight returns as Hulk recedes. My personal interpretation is that this could represent a couple of things. To start, originally in the comics, the way Banner turned to Hulk and vice versa was actually through time of day. So in the day, Banner could roam free, but as night fell, the Hulk would emerge. This was later changed to how we know it today, where Hulk emerges when Banner is under stress. So the game's lighting change could be a nod back to that, but what I imagine is probably more likely is that the mirror is Bruce's mind and the lighting represents the darkness inside him. Hulk is that darkness to him, so as Hulk gets a stronger grip on him, the darkness starts to overwhelm Bruce. However, as we see, despite the light returning, the Hulk still takes control, so I think what's happening is that the darkness has left Bruce's mind, but has now progressed to manifesting itself physically in the real world as Hulk. I also like the shot of Bruce looking into the broken mirror as he transforms, further symbolizing his fractured mind. Regardless of whether I'm reaching or looking too hard into this or not, I really love how the sequence is done, and I like that it got me thinking about Bruce's psychology. Bruce having internal struggles between the Hulk and his other personas is very common in the comics too, as we see Bruce enter his own mindscape to speak with them occasionally, so I think this is very on brand. In fact, the title of this level is called Inner Torment, so I think witnessing this struggle is really cool. Another thing I want to discuss about the opening cinematic is that it was at one point meant to look a bit different. In the game's strategy guide, alternate storyboards are showcased. One of them is this opening sequence where the bathroom moment is omitted. Instead, Bruce is outside the gas station attempting to change a tire, but having trouble with it. That may sound random at first, but it's actually a reference to the old Bill Bixby Hulk series. In the pilot episode, Bruce hulks out for the first time while trying to change his tire, since he gets incredibly stressed in the process. So I like that planned callback, but I do still think the mirror scene was a good change to tie into the movie. The story of Radical making that change is actually interesting too. Eric Holmes told me that it stemmed from Radical not having a lot of info about the movie for much of development, since movie productions are so secretive.
So the publisher with the Hulk game was Vivendi Universal, and the important part of that name is Universal. Now Universal was the group making the movie, and they had the rights. I believe they still have the rights to this day.
Right.
And I think part of the reason that Marvel agreed to license to them was, well, you guys are making the movie too, so you'll be able to internally share all information, and it'll all be so much easier than if it goes to someone else and it's complicated and there's various blockages in the way. That turned out to not be true at all. For us, at least. We just didn't get access to information for a long time. And I do remember one really uncomfortable conversation we had. I think it must have been a Marvel guy, Marvel producer probably on that first game, where he was trying to tell us, he was giving us feedback on a part of our plan that we'd hit him with. And I think it was the opening for the game. And he started saying, yeah, so this opening thing, we should make it more like the movie, like that scene in the movie where he's looking into the mirror. And I remember all of us are on a conference call looking at the phone going, yeah, can you remind us which scene that was? Because he was assuming we've seen everything, and we can't tell him we haven't seen anything, because then it goes against what they thought they were getting. but the Universal theatrical guys just weren't forthcoming, and so we hadn't seen anything when we got. That slowly started to change throughout development. Our art director got to go and visit, I think it must have been ILM, who were doing effects, and he saw a bunch of things in production. But this was so this game was almost a 2-year schedule. I think this would have been something like 9 months before we were finished. We got some shots of the military base, so we got to see some of the production design. We did get to base some of the environmental art on that, but again, it was quite late.
Eric mentioned their art director, Martin Bay, having access to ILM's work on the movie, and it sounds like they were quite collaborative based on this behind-the-scenes clip.
The idea is to capture in every single detail the world that we've created in the movie and translate it into the game world.
To really push the bar on the game people's side to make a character walk and move and do the things that our digital character does in the film. That was quite a challenge technologically, I'm sure, for them also, just as it was for us in the movie.
We'll see some more examples of the game's connectivity to the movie, but continuing on, we next get our first taste of gameplay as the military arrives to apprehend Hulk. I thought this was a pretty cool tutorial level. Even though the on-screen prompts tell us the basics of gameplay, we're actually free to do whatever we want in this moment, so there's a lot of opportunity to play around and experiment with combat as you see fit. This is also nice on a second playthrough since you can just wail on guys here and wreak havoc instead of having to follow the tutorial script. As far as the gameplay itself, there's a lot of great mechanics on offer. To start, you have a limited amount of combos that you can perform, and you can also charge certain attacks to deal some extra damage. You can also grab enemies and either beat on them, perform a cinematic slam attack, or just throw them away at the other enemies. Already I'm getting a good sense of the Hulk's power through these moves, but the best part of the gameplay in my opinion is the level of interactiveness with the environment. We'll see better examples throughout the game, but Hulk can damage and utilize most objects in the area, for example Bruce's car. In later levels, I thought it was a ton of fun to go break something in the room and then weaponize it against nearby enemies. Objects used in this way deal more damage, so you're incentivized to do this regularly. I think that's a great design choice because as the player, the main thing I want to do when entering a Hulk game is smash stuff, so I'm rewarded for doing so and it feels on theme. Another thematic gameplay aspect is the way Hulk's aggression is utilized. As you beat up enemies or take damage, the red bar in Hulk's HUD will increase. You can further charge your meter by finding red rage orbs in the environment or loot them from enemies, since they'll sometimes drop rage or health upon defeat. But once you max out your rage meter, Hulk will become, well, enraged and begin to glow, signifying his increased strength. This matches the comics since the angrier Hulk gets, the stronger he gets. When you're enraged in the game, your attacks deal increased damage, and you also have the opportunity to unleash one of two super attacks, both of which are greatly amplified versions of normal attacks. For example, one is Hulk's Sonic Clap. When done normally, it can be charged to knock back enemies and even stun them. When enraged, it does even more damage in a much wider range. My personal favorite though is the overhand smash, where Hulk throws both fists to the ground to create an AoE shockwave around him. When done normally, this attack is okay, but honestly not that impressive. While enraged though, it's so much fun to perform because it feels so devastating, like you're completely annihilating everything around you. But to sum that up, there are some great abilities available here, making you really feel like the Hulk from the start. We'll talk more in depth about the combat and how the overall game is balanced around it as we get deeper into the video, but for now, I'm really enjoying what's on display. Continuing forward, after our tutorial, we're given another cutscene, and like with the last one, we'll watch it first and then discuss.
Hello.
Bruce, I finished it. The Gamma Orb is your chance. A cure.
It worked? But how?
There's no time to explain. The military are taking control of the lab. They're after the orb. My assistant just left a subvocal earpiece in a dumpster at the rear of the building. I'll guide you in. Hurry, Bruce. You have to get here before they do.
My career. Betty. My entire life. Infected by this disease. I'm going after the cure.
So there's some pretty interesting things going on in that clip. First, I should confirm that the voice actor for Bruce is indeed Eric Bana, the actor from the film. I think he does a good job in the role, providing a very ponderous, internal Bruce Banner. Radical stated that Eric recorded his lines for the game during production for the film, allowing him to be more easily in character for the game. We get another nice nod to the film when Bruce looks at a photo of him and Betty. In the movie, this photo was important since it was used to showcase a flashback to a happier time, when Bruce and Betty were still dating, and before the Hulk was a thing. It's cool to see it here, showing that Bruce still cares for Betty, and that he keeps this photo among what I can only assume is a handful of possessions while on the run. Looking at the cinematic itself more closely, it's revealed that our opening gameplay at the gas station was all just a nightmare. I thought it was cool that the original storyboards provided additional hints of the dream before the reveal. For example, a moment where Hulk hears a phone ringing behind him during his fight with the army, while in parallel there's a phone ringing in Bruce's motel room, similar to how sometimes when we're dreaming we'll hear things in the real world that make their way into our dreams. The storyboards also show a different version of our transition from Hulk back to Banner. Instead of the Hulk leaping onto the helicopter and falling, Hulk instead would have been confronted by a helicopter missile flying directly towards his face before waking up. Kind of like in a real dream where right before the impact of a fall, for example, you spring up from the bed. I also think it's fitting that we start things off with a dream, because Hulk-based nightmares are common for Bruce in the comics, but we also see it in the movie, and even in the old TV series, the first episode also begins with one of Bruce's nightmares, so I think the game ties in all of that nicely. Even though I like the original storyboard concepts and their dreamlike qualities, I think it was right to make the changes that they did, since I like how the official version connects closer to the movie, specifically Hulk leaping onto the helicopter. It's reminiscent of the scene in the film where Hulk clings to a fighter jet before falling off. It's one of my favorite scenes because it really triggers a fear of heights sensation for me, so Hulk falling off the helicopter was a nice, scary callback. It's also very cinematic and still provides an exciting transition back to Banner. In the next part of the cutscene, as we saw, Bruce gets a surprise call from someone named Dr. Crawford, an old mentor of his from when he was in college. Dr. Crawford states that he's found a way to cure Bruce of the Hulk, but that the military have learned of his device and want to use it for their own schemes, so Bruce needs to get to Crawford's lab immediately while staying under the radar. Crawford's assistant leaves Bruce an earpiece in a dumpster so that Crawford can audibly guide him to the machine. This begins our next mission, titled Desperate Measures. More importantly, this is our first gameplay mission as Bruce Banner. That's right, we actually get to play as Bruce. Just up front, I think the game's Banner missions have a bit of a bad reputation, but I don't think they're as bad as you might have heard, and we'll discuss that throughout the video. The mission begins with Banner creeping into the facility as we see the military are already there. While he's sneaking along, we get to hear some of his thoughts, such as how he and Crawford never saw eye to eye, and that they haven't spoken in 10 years. Banner also finds it suspicious that Crawford, of all people, was able to locate Bruce, a man on the run who even the military hadn't located. Regardless, Bruce is so desperate for a cure that he's willing to see what Crawford has developed in hopes that he's telling the truth. Getting to the lab won't be easy though, as the military are all over the place. Bruce isn't a fighter, so we'll need to wait for them to pass and sneak around them as we progress through the facility. Still, Bruce isn't a pushover. If you do get caught, I thought it was interesting that you can attempt to fight your way out, with some limited punch attacks. In this early level, I actually found it quite fun trying to fight off a guard or two, since you're at such a disadvantage. Radical could have very easily just made this an instant game over if they wanted, so I'm glad the player has the opportunity to fight or flee if they so choose. Although in later levels, it might as well be an immediate game over when caught, because Banner doesn't stand a chance against gunfire and mutated enemy types. In this level, if you're caught and injured, you'll begin to Hulk out, which is basically your game over, since that ruins your chance at using Crawford's device. Another cool feature to help prevent getting caught is that Bruce has the ability to incapacitate unsuspecting enemies if he can sneak behind them. I'm not sure I believe that Banner is capable of this, but it's at least fun gameplay. However, I didn't do this too often as I found it better to just sneak around. While navigating through the facility, Bruce will also catch a glimpse of the general in charge, the same one we saw during the opening cutscene, General Riker. If you're like me, you were probably expecting General Thunderbolt Ross, the one who's usually spearheading any military effort to capture Banner, like in the movie. I'm not sure why he wasn't used here, but there are lines in the game files that mention that Riker took over for Thunderbolt Ross and that Ross isn't a fan of him. Also, just a side note, the voice lines came out really bassy when I extracted them, and I'm not sure why, but that's why they sound weird.
General Ross seems to have given up control of the Gamma base to General Riker. I'm out of friends and knee-deep in trouble. I get the feeling that Riker wants the Hulk as a trophy. I'd be safer if General Ross were still running Gamma base. General Riker, I once heard Betty's father, General Ross, speak of him. His ruthless, bad news for Gemini Labs.
Although the specifics of the comics don't match, I believe this could still be a nod to the Dogs of War run featuring Riker, since Riker also takes control of Gamma Base from Ross, using manipulation of the President, as well as by blackmailing Ross. So it's not a stretch to imagine him pulling similar measures in the game to squeeze him out. Plus, Talbot took control away from Ross pretty easily in the movie, so it's fitting in that way too. Regardless, you're probably asking, who's General Riker then? Well, he's from the comics and was quite prevalent in that Dogs of War series, written by Paul Jenkins, and those comics, as well as more of Jenkins' work, were used as inspiration for the game, as well as the movie, I imagine. In those comics, General Riker is introduced as a shadowy government figure who's believed to be responsible for some of America's biggest conspiracies, the main one being the assassination of JFK. Even Nick Fury meets with Hulk to give him intel on Riker, and he states that if he were actually scared of anyone in the world, it would be Riker. So you know if Nick Fury is apprehensive about someone, they're pretty shady. Still, things are a bit obscure as, by his own admission, Riker says he lies about everything in order to further obfuscate the truth. He claims that he didn't actually do the horrible things he was accused of, but offered his name up for them in order to divert attention from the military's real goals. Basically, we're left wondering what exactly he's actually done, but even still, we know he's a bad guy. As far as his motivations towards the Hulk, Riker wants to study him so that he can weaponize the Hulk and or create an army of Hulks for his own goals. This actually parallels another villain in the game, but we'll discuss them more later. From here, we continue through the facility where we're soon given a small hacking minigame for Bruce. It's a pretty simple puzzle on the surface since you just need to match the code at the top by swapping the order of the bottom sequence around one by one while on a timer. The puzzle itself isn't hard, but I did find it strangely difficult to focus on. With so many random characters, especially in later puzzles, my eyes would sort of start to glaze over against my control, making it tougher to do this easy task. So it's not really tough, but I did think it was funny how the challenge manifested for me. But eventually, we reach Crawford's lab. Along the way, we come across the Gamma Sphere, which was Bruce's invention in the movie that malfunctioned and caused him to become the Hulk. Crawford tells us that he's perfected it, making a miniaturized device he calls the Gamma Orb, which can absorb gamma radiation, essentially removing the Hulk from Bruce. The orb itself is rather small, but it's hooked up to a large machine where Banner will sit to get hit with a ray. I thought this machine was pretty cool because it reminds me a bit of Bruce's origin in the TV show, where he also sits in a chair and blasts himself with gamma rays. I may be reaching a bit there, but I see Crawford's design as a very slight nod back to that. I should mention that the movie is a closer representation of how Banner becomes the Hulk in the comics compared to the show, although both are still quite different, but let's briefly look at Hulk's comic origins so you have that context. So in the comics, Bruce Banner was a scientist working with the military to create a gamma bomb, something that Bruce invented. The plan was to test Bruce's gamma bomb in the desert, away from civilians. Everything was going smooth until Bruce noticed a teenager drive onto the testing site. His name is Rick Jones, and he did this because his friends dared him to sneak onto the site. Unbeknownst to Rick, this was the exact moment that they were about to test the gamma bomb. Unable to stop the countdown, Bruce sprang into action and ran into the desert to save Rick. Bruce threw himself into a ditch, but wasn't able to dive in himself before the detonation occurred, and Bruce was engulfed in gamma rays. This should have killed him, but instead he was fine. It wasn't until later that he learned the effect the rays had on him, which was that it turned him into the Hulk at night. While we're on the subject of Bruce's origins, I also want to briefly discuss something about this first issue, because it's relevant to the game as well. So as you might notice, the Hulk wasn't green in the first comic. Stan Lee stated that he originally wanted the Hulk to be gray, since he thought it would be scarier. However, when they printed the comic, he discovered that the printer struggled with gray, leading to inconsistent coloring of the Hulk over the course of the issue. So by issue number 2, they pivoted and made him green. For continuity's sake, writer Peter David found a way to make Grey Hulk canon by making him another persona of Bruce's. Grey Hulk is smarter, which explains him speaking in normal sentences in those early comics, but he's not as strong as the Green Hulk. At one point in the comics, Bruce and Hulk are presumed dead. They later resurface in Las Vegas, but it's the Grey Hulk that emerges and takes control of the body. In Vegas, he becomes an enforcer for a casino and goes by the name of Joe Fixit. He's a snarkier, more outspoken Hulk who frequently banters and trash talks his opponents mid-fight. How is this relevant to the game? Well, the developers actually hid a playable Grey Hulk in here as bonus content. Like many games of this era, it contains cheat codes. Most can be inputted in the main menu's cheat screen, but some special ones can only be used on hidden terminals within the banner levels. Finding a code for these terminals usually nets you some kind of behind-the-scenes video, but one of them is for Grey Hulk. Finding the code is actually quite unique in itself, because you won't find it in the game, but instead in the movie. During the scene where Hulk is on a rampage in the lab, he comes across his father hiding behind a door with the nameplate reading janitor. That's pretty normal looking, but supposedly, this was the hidden code, at least based on what the internet says. This wasn't something I was able to confirm. Regardless, when you input Janitor into one of these mission terminals, it'll unlock the ability to play as Grey Hulk. Why the word Janitor? I believe this is a nod to the comics, because when Bruce returns to the body after Joe Fixit, he takes a job as a janitor at a research lab to gain access to their equipment. The comic run that this is part of is related to a couple other characters in the game too, so we'll talk about it further shortly. As far as Joe Fixit, or Grey Hulk as I'll mostly refer to him in this video, he's a great bonus in the game. Most games would just make him a recolor of the Hulk, but Radical went the extra mile and hired a voice actor named Michael Donovan to play him. He's an excellent choice since he voiced Grey Hulk in the 90s animated series. Eric Holmes also tells me that they hadn't actually hired Michael for this role initially, in a funny coincidental story regarding adding Grey Hulk late into production.
And I remember at one point we were working and figuring out who we were going to cast for this, because I think we were pretty light on budget at that point. And it turned out the voice director we were working with, I think it was Michael Donovan, was the Hulk in the animated series.
Oh, okay.
We had a very weird conversation. We're like, how are we going to get this character? How are we going to get him going? And he's like, I'm the Grey Hulk. And we're like, what? And he's like, no, look, I am him. And so we managed to get him into the booth for that. So that was fantastic. We accidentally walked into the room with the Grey Hulk.
Grey Hulk has a ton of voice lines in the game too, which is appreciated because he's constantly trash talking. Certain lines still get repetitive, but there's enough that it's still bearable. He even has some specific lines for various villains that he encounters, but more generally, next, I'll play some examples of what Grey Hulk says throughout the course of the game.
Why don't you beg me to stop? You cannot win! Oh, this is embarrassing. What do I have here? You lucky punky. No one's coming to help you. Where does that Gamma Thug think he's going? Go long. Can you play catch? Oh, everybody's in trouble now! So, where's your boss now? Oh yeah! I love this! Man, you thought your car stereo was loud. Say, Uncle, say it! You should have heard the last guy scream.
I didn't hear these next ones in-game, but here are a couple audio files of him referring to himself as Joe Fixit.
Come on, kids, wrestle with Big Joe. Big Joe's always breaking his toys. You need a visit from Mr. Fixit.
So yeah, Grey Hulk is really awesome, and we'll see more of him throughout this video. Returning to the main narrative, Bruce next hops into the device so that Crawford can drain the gamma from him. He does this as promised, to a degree. We now get to see Professor Crawford for the first time, and we notice that he's in a wheelchair, which will be relevant in a moment. With the orb full of gamma energy, Crawford reaches out, infusing himself with the gamma. This turns him into a Hulk-like creature, going by the name of Ravage. We even get a voice line from him.
I'm not a frail man anymore.
Banner is furious at the betrayal and still has some gamma within him, causing him to transform into the Hulk. Ravage flees, so Hulk pursues. Before continuing to the next level though, let's talk about Dr. Crawford and Ravage in the comics, because the game doesn't give us any additional information about them. So to start, Crawford was indeed a mentor of Bruce's in college, and someone he held in high regard. Bruce returns to that college later in hopes that Crawford will help him find a cure. When they meet again, Bruce notices the wheelchair and mentions that he didn't know Crawford's health had been in decline. So in the game, it makes sense that Bruce doesn't know this either. Crawford is concerned that his health will continue to deteriorate beyond this point, but still continues his research. Coincidentally, Crawford has been working on a teleportation device. He believes this could actually help Bruce since one pod breaks down matter into energy and the next pod rematerializes it. His theory is that he can scan and map Bruce's gamma-irradiated body chemistry and then filter out the gamma during the conversion, essentially eliminating the Hulk. Bruce agrees, so they scan and map his DNA with the goal of running the experiment the next day. In the meantime, Bruce stays the night in Crawford's guest room. Late at night though, Crawford sneaks out and returns to the lab. He pairs Bruce's DNA to the device and then hops in so that the device can reconfigure his DNA to give him gamma abilities. Desperate to cure his condition, Crawford couldn't resist the temptation to try to replicate the Hulk's abilities himself once he realized the strength and regeneration it possessed. However, as Crawford initiates the machine, Bruce actually catches him in the act, but he's too late to stop the process. Like in the game, the frustration of the betrayal causes Bruce to Hulk out while Crawford emerges from the machine as Ravage. The two soon fight, but come daytime, they both revert back to their human forms. It's important to remember that Crawford isn't evil, just desperate to get his life back. He recognizes that his Ravage form is out of control, but tells Bruce that he plans to find a way to gain control over the Ravage body through further experimentation. Bruce isn't swayed though, since he knows how uncontrollable and destructive the Hulk can be, so he thinks the best solution is to remove Ravage from Crawford entirely, even with his declining health. So with that disagreement, Crawford betrays Bruce again shortly after this when the military arrive looking for Banner. Crawford tells Bruce to hide, but then immediately tells the military where to find him. Having Bruce hauled off buys him time to learn more about Ravage, but what ends up happening is that Ravage goes on another destructive spree, and General Ross has no choice but to release the Hulk to stop Ravage, essentially picking the lesser of two evils. As characters in general, I really like the dynamic between Crawford and Bruce, and find them to be a fascinating pair in how they contrast. I can sympathize with Crawford and might even do the same in his position, but I also understand Bruce's perspective given his experience with the Hulk. So ultimately, I'm glad we got Ravage in this game, and I'm happy to see that he's a persistent threat throughout the story. This brings us to the next level, where we pursue Ravage as the Hulk. It actually takes place in San Francisco in order to provide some familiarity to the movie, which also takes place there. In the cityscape, there are a couple of fun buildings. The first one is for Universal. As mentioned earlier, Vivendi Universal published the game. Universal also holds the movie distribution rights to the Hulk even still today. It's actually why the MCU has only done one Hulk solo movie, as Universal would have to distribute it, and they have the right to refuse a new Hulk project, so instead Hulk appears in other characters' movies to bypass this. Going back to the game, we can also see a building for Radical at one point, which I thought was fun too. The city level was actually one of my favorites in the game, because it feels so open. We're on the rooftops pursuing our target, all while constantly getting ambushed by the military soldiers, so we're getting a lot of opportunity to play around with the combat, and the environments all have a great destructive quality to them. We'll also leap from building to building, which was something I wanted to do as Hulk. It's all done through a quick cutscene, so we're not actually controlling the jumps, but with this being the first major Hulk game, I'm good with it. Again, I think this is another really cool example of where Radical started with Hulk compared to where they managed to go in Ultimate Destruction. The destructive environments are a bigger deal than I initially realized too. Of course, it's awesome breaking stuff, but one thing I kept seeing in old reviews and promotional interviews is the inclusion of a physics system. So when you break things as Hulk, objects will fly around realistically depending on how hard you hit them and from what angle. Nowadays, this is something you just kind of expect to be included, but that wasn't the case back then. It was very technically demanding, but it was important to Radical as explained in this behind the scenes clip.
We put a lot of emphasis on our physics simulation. The way the player feels that is when you destroy something and debris is created, or you pick up a car and whack somebody with a car, the objects and the characters interact as they would in real life, as per, the laws of physics.
Every time you break through a wall and all the chunks and pieces of that wall fall down on the ground, they'll fall differently every time depending on what hit them, what direction they've been hit, and what they're hitting against as they fall on the ground. To create these true physics in the game, it absorbs a lot of processing power.
It's clear that Radical wanted you to get a great sense of destruction and for the environment to respond to your attacks appropriately. Although it's subtle and technically costly, I think the physics system was effective and worthwhile in the end. Going back to the story, eventually we reach the ground level where we pass a very obvious Mountain Dew sponsorship before continuing into the sewers to find Ravage. When we finally catch up to him, we're interrupted by another enemy type, the Gamma Dogs. They of course were used prominently in the movie as Gamma experiments, made and weaponized by Bruce's father, David Banner. As a bit of a side note, in the comics, Bruce's dad's name is actually Brian Banner, so I'm not sure why the movie made things more confusing by naming him David, especially because the old TV show changed Bruce's name to David. As far as the show at least, Stan Lee actually explains why they changed his name during an interview from The Marvelous World of Stan Lee.
When I found out that they were changing the name from Bruce Banner to David Banner, I asked the logical question, why are you doing that? His name is supposed to be Bruce. And some genius at the network said, oh no, Stan, Bruce makes him sound homosexual. It sounds gay. I said, there's Bruce Jenner, the athletic decathlon champ. There's Bruce, well, I don't think I knew Bruce Willis at the time, but I mentioned it didn't faze him. No, we don't like the sound of Bruce. I said, you can't change his name. He's been David Banner. He's been Bruce Banner for all these years, but they were the network and they were in charge.
The example he gave as a defense might not have aged particularly well, but the point still stands that it's a dumb reason to change the name and very disappointing if true. But going back to Bruce's father, who I'll refer to as Brian for the purposes of this video, I want to talk a bit more about his time in the comics, since he's prevalent in the movie and key to the Hulk. To start, the movie's usage of Brian is pretty close to the comics, not counting his powers. He's actually not superpowered in the comics, so the movie instead blended him with the villain Absorbing Man. Interestingly, Eric Holmes told me that they originally planned to have Absorbing Man in the game, but they pulled him when they learned the movie was using him. As far as Brian's comic origin, he spent much of his life's work in atomic research, which put him in contact with radiation. This made him concerned about how his genetic structure might have been affected and whether it would also affect a potential child. Still, his wife Rebecca wanted a child, and they eventually had one. Rebecca was overjoyed at the birth of Bruce, but Brian despised him. Not only did Bruce pull all of Rebecca's attention away from him, but he was convinced that Bruce would become some kind of monster. His paranoia only grew as Bruce aged and showcased great intellect, which Brian saw as a sign of an abnormality. Brian was an abusive father and husband, and one day, Rebecca attempted to escape with Bruce, but Brian caught her in the act and killed her in front of Bruce. Brian was taken to a mental institution, but was released 15 years later when the psychiatrist saw him fit for normal life again. Bruce wasn't as convinced, and those suspicions turned out to be true when Brian once again tried to kill Bruce at Rebecca's gravesite of all places. Bruce accidentally killed Brian in the process, and the police chalked it up to a random mugging. Even with Brian gone, the trauma that Bruce suffered as a child still plagues him. It's also a major root cause for the Hulk, as the Hulk is said to be the childhood manifestation of Bruce's anger and pain from Brian's abuse, not to mention witnessing his mother's death, as well as Bruce's desire for strength to protect her. So Hulk is more emotional and speaks more childlike for this reason. The movie displays a lot of this well, and although there are some differences, I think it's a good portrayal. The movie also ties the Gamma Dogs to Bruce's father, although this is different from the comics, since they're actually created by General Riker there. My assumption is that Riker piggybacked off Brian's work to mass-produce them in the game's lore. As far as their gameplay usage, they're a solid enemy type. So far we've only gone up against puny guards, so the Gamma Dogs provide a good early challenge. They aren't too tough to beat, but they're very fast and aggressive, so fighting multiple of them keeps you on your toes. Unlike the movie, it's not just these three that we have to worry about, as they'll be a recurring enemy type for the rest of the game. Before long, our pursuit of Ravage takes us out of the sewers and into the city. Soon after, we reach the point of our first boss fight, but it's not against Ravage.
Expecting someone else. He took the orb to Alcatraz, but that's not where you're going.
We're ambushed by a different supervillain, and for unknown reasons. Half-Life serves as our first boss of the game, and he's challenging in the way that he forces you to think outside of the box a bit. He's described as an energy vampire, someone who can drain your power through touch. So the twist with this fight is that you can't punch him. Thankfully, the area is littered with debris for you to hit him with, and there are also energy generators which you can knock him into if you can manage it. Hurting him isn't as easy as it sounds though, because Half-Life knows he has the edge on you. He's incredibly fast and agile, striking quick to interrupt you or make you drop weapons, and he'll even dodge thrown objects from time to time. So he's a tough opening boss, but I think he's a really good one, since I like that this forces the player to pay close attention not only to what Half-Life is doing, but also to the environment for opportunities to weaponize things, both of which will be important skills for the rest of the game. You may also be asking, who even is Half-Life, and is he from the comics? Well, he actually is, but a little different. The game gives him quite a redesign, making him appear more vampiric while dressing him in a battle suit that glows with energy. It's a solid design, and you get a good sense of his power set just by looking at him. The comics, however, make him appear more zombie-like. His story there is that he was blasted by an experimental gamma bomb, much like Bruce Banner, but not the same bomb. Half-Life's powers also follow a day-night cycle like Bruce's originally did, however in this case, during the day, Half-Life would die. At night, he'd re-emerge and prowl the Earth looking for someone to drain in hopes of reclaiming some of that humanity back. Half-Life was soon found by the big-brain supervillain The Leader, who saw potential in Half-Life and sent him after the Hulk. Hulk was a great opportunity for Half-Life due to his unlimited energy. This just so happened to be the Grey Hulk at the time, so he was a bit smarter and was able to defeat Half-Life, in this case, by ripping him apart and throwing the pieces far away. This wasn't the last we saw of him though, as the Leader reclaimed all the pieces and brought him back. This time, he outfitted him with a titanium battlesuit in hopes he'd stand a better chance against the Hulk. In their next encounter, Half-Life pretty much won by draining a vast amount of energy from the Hulk to the point Half-Life even looked human. However, Grey Hulk reminded him that this was only temporary and that he'd live the rest of his life killing and searching for energy. Half-Life either chose death or was just distressed and tried to expel all the energy, either way causing himself to explode and die. So kind of an abrupt and weird exit for him in the comics. Still, I like the ways that Radical took inspiration from the comics and the way they incorporated him into the game. In fact, when looking at more of the game's concepts, it appears that Radical originally intended for him to look more like his comic book counterpart. I'm unsure why they changed it, but I think both styles are good, so I'm happy either way. Half-Life isn't exactly an A-tier villain, so just having him included here is cool in itself. But after defeating him, he tells us where to head to next.
Hurting me won't do you any good. Go to Alcatraz, see for yourself. If our security net detects you, we kill our hostage. It's that simple.
As he mentioned, we have to head to Alcatraz, but we can't go as Hulk. This leads to our next banner mission where we need to infiltrate the site using stealth. The last banner mission was essentially a tutorial, so this one is our first legitimate stealth section. It starts with us waiting for a patrol of guards to pass, while also dodging spotlights in the area. We have to move some crates to make a path as well, and this is also where I encountered an unfortunate bug where Banner would get stuck while crossing the boxes. This was probably just an emulator bug, but I thought it was funny and I had to switch to the GameCube version momentarily to pass it. But afterwards, we then sneak past some sleeping Gamma Dogs and pretty much creep around the rest of the compound, performing certain puzzles to unlock doors while avoiding more spotlights and guards. It's nothing crazy, but if you've heard anything about this game before, it's likely that the banner missions are terrible or something like that. I don't think it's that bad, but I assume it has that reputation due to a couple of reasons. The first is that these missions are quite slow-paced when you're mainly here to smash things up as the Hulk. The second is that stealth can be rather punishing at times. Even though you can technically fight, enemies now have guns and can make short work of you, so it's essentially an instant game over if you're caught. Even if you do progress and reach some checkpoints, the game has a continues feature, where you're allowed to continue from your last checkpoint if you die, but usually only 3 times, unless you found an extra continue token or 2. Once you exceed those, you're thrown back to the beginning of the level. So if you're struggling with one part of a mission, it can be incredibly frustrating to then have to redo the entire beginning part of that level again just to retry that section. In general, I experienced each of these frustrations at some point or another, but we'll discuss that more in the gameplay section of the video. Continuing on, we reach a security terminal where we can see the feeds of different areas across Alcatraz. The first monitor shows Betty Ross, Bruce's love interest from the movie and comics. On the next screen, Bruce sees guards being transformed into Gamma soldiers via a chamber powered by the Gamma Orb. Then it switches to another shot, showing us that Ravage is here too, and he's of course the one who brought the orb. Then on the next screen, we see another Hulk-like being who's ordered by an off-screen voice to dispose of Betty Ross. We see him do just that as he captures Betty in her lab, and this sends Bruce into a rage, transforming him back into the Hulk, beginning our next combat section. We'll fight our way through Alcatraz and also face a new enemy type, those Gamma soldiers created by the orb. They're another strong enemy type, able to deal out some good damage and even grab Hulk. Another one of my compliments for this game is its enemy variety, and I appreciate that they all feel unique from one another and required me to approach them all a bit differently. But after a lot of fighting, we eventually find Madman, the red creature we saw on the screen earlier. He has Betty trapped in the transformation chamber with the intent of turning her into a Hulk. I actually thought this was a bit funny, since in the comics, Betty has been turned into a few different creatures, such as a winged one named Harpy, as well as the Red She-Hulk, and no spoilers, but it's something the Immortal Hulk comic addresses in a cool way too. On the subject of Betty, there was another audio file I found interesting, where Crawford explains that she helped him find Bruce at the beginning of the game, although I doubt she knew he'd betray them.
I contacted Betty when I first realized the orb could work. She doesn't know where you are, but she gave me a list of the places you might be. I knew it was only a matter of time till I found you. I tried for months to track you down. I knew that sooner or later you would visit one of your old haunts here in San Francisco.
I also wanted to see what happens if you fail to save Betty here, and to my surprise, there's actually a small game over animation. Unfortunately, in this timeline, it seems the chamber disintegrates her instead of turning her into a Hulk. Either way, we have to stop Madman from triggering the device, so our goal is to not only defeat him, but also destroy the terminals that would activate it. Before we get started, let's talk about the Madman character because he's another comic inclusion. Madman began as a human named Phil Stearns, and if that sounds familiar, it's because his brother is Samuel Stearns, aka The Leader. Bruce and Phil went to college together, and Phil was jealous of how brilliant Bruce was. Bruce accomplished much, while Phil always struggled to get by. When Phil learned of Bruce's accident with the Gamma Bomb, Phil attempted to replicate it on himself. This turned him into the creature Madman. During the time when Bruce was hiding out as a janitor, Phil coincidentally worked at that same lab. He recognized Bruce and later injected him with a virus that would kill him over time. The leader actually offered to help cure Hulk because he saw Madman as a threat, so he told Hulk where to find an antidote. This of course led to the Hulk and Madman coming to blows, and during the fight, Madman was injected with the virus as well, and soon after defeated by Hulk. Banner successfully cured himself, but left Phil to die, with the cure just barely out of reach. In a later comic issue, we learn that Phil survived by turning into Madman again and curing himself. Madman was now living up to his name, returning even crazier than before, sounding almost cartoonish. For example, he held a man hostage and demanded to be declared the King of England. He's pretty crazy in the game too, but not to that degree, although he still has some fun voice lines that show his humor.
And the Hulk is toast. Dance for me. No more, Mr. Nice Guy. I can see your tongue. Say hello to my many friends.
Some of my favorites were actually the ones I didn't hear in the game, but instead in the audio files, and a few even referred to his brother, the leader.
Quit touching me, pervert. Come here, boy. By the way, love your pants. My brother's gonna own you. My brother's gonna kick your... You can't stop my brother. He's smarter than all of us. My brother's gonna beat on you.
Once we destroy all the terminals, Betty's safe, so we turn our attention to Madman. Unfortunately for us, this sends him into a rage where he heals back to full health. This brings us to Phase 2 against a fully charged Madman. I actually struggled a lot with this fight because Madman is very strong, fast, and aggressive. He has some good AoE attacks, and not only that, but he gains invincibility on wake-up attacks after being knocked down. So you really have to keep your distance and choose when to engage, or else he'll punish you. It's not easy to keep your distance either, since he has a good charge attack, and we don't have a great evasive or defensive maneuver ourselves except to jump. There's technically a dash, but the input is a bit clunky to use, it's not very far, and it leaves you stationary at the end, so I usually prefer to just jump. Jumping still worked well enough, since when he starts to charge, you just want to get out of the way and he'll exhaust himself after the fourth one. So opportunities like this are where you can put in some damage, and this forced me to start chaining combos together to get as many hits in as I could to maximize that window. So you'll essentially beat him by waiting for openings and either chaining a combo or grabbing him. You also have to take into account minions on the battlefield, since 3 will spawn in at the same time, and if you defeat them, they'll just infinitely respawn. It starts with normal guards, including a couple rocket launcher enemies, but Gamma soldiers will spawn in if you defeat enough guards, so I found it best to take out all but one rocket launcher guy, so nobody else spawns in. You can even get the guard to shoot Madman sometimes, which is pretty fun too. Ultimately, this was a pretty lengthy and hair-raising fight with a lot to monitor, and it was definitely my first main struggle in the game. But once we defeat Madman, we turn our attention back to Betty. She tells us that she's been infected with our gamma energy and demands that we find a way to fix it. Unfortunately, this means taking her to the military base, the one place that we want to avoid, but we don't really have much of a choice. As expected, as soon as Hulk arrives, a domed shield is activated to prevent our escape, and the Hulk is soon knocked out. General Riker emerges, pleased to finally run tests on him. We then cut to inside the base, where Bruce is being held captive. Thankfully, Betty decides to return the favor and rescue us, at which point she drops some important info.
Betty,
Bruce, stop. The leader is building a gamma army. You must escape and recover the orb. Destroy it so the Hulk's essence can't be used against anyone. We need to hide these soldiers and find a way to get you off this base.
there's an idea.
It feels like her mention of the leader comes out of nowhere, as I didn't encounter any other mention of him ahead of this. He's not really built up at all either, and it felt like we just run into him at the end of the game. But essentially, the leader is our second and main antagonist, mirroring General Riker and his desire to study the Hulk and create an army of them to take over the world. Although that's something I'm mostly pulling from the strategy guide, as it wasn't something I heard expressed in the game. Nevertheless, our goal now is to escape the base, meaning we're on to our next banner mission, this time disguised as a soldier. As the mission starts, Bruce mentions feeling sluggish due to the military drugging him. Based on the chapter load screen, it states that Riker injected gamma suppression drugs into his system, preventing him from transforming into the Hulk, so our goal is to first craft an antidote for that. Running around the base while disguised is a fun idea. The basics are that you can explore freely while disguised, but if you get too close to someone, they'll get a better look at you and realize you aren't one of them. That's perfectly fine. The issue for me is the camera. It's often fixed at a certain angle, usually to a point where you can't see what's in front of you. If we were in a normal third-person perspective set behind Bruce, we'd very easily be able to see what's in front of him. But as it stands, it's nerve-wracking just walking forward because you can't really see if someone's directly in front of you. The rest of the mission is a bit tedious too, as we try to find different chemical mixtures before combining them into a serum. Something I do like about this level is that it's based on the movie. Radical were given access to the movie sets when crafting their game, so they incorporated some of that into it, such as here with the underground base, which they describe in a behind-the-scenes clip.
Another environment we've been able to bring into the game from the film is the underground military base. And this was a really fun one because we got to get our team on the set of the military base and not only get to see just what it looks like, but how it works.
You even see the Atheon logo on the doors, like in the film where Atheon was the company led by Talbot. I think it's clever how Radical found ways to bring us to familiar locations to provide that sense of unity to the film, despite the game taking place 1 year after it. Another thing I found interesting about not only this area, but maybe the stealth missions in general, is the cut inventory system. The cuttingroomfloor.com shows an unused taser image that indicates that one was originally designed to be picked up somewhere in the game. Furthermore, the game's manual has a leftover line stating that Bruce can pick up weapons if he finds them. So to me, it sounds like we could have explored as Bruce and found hidden weapons to aid us in fights if things went south. I imagine it was cut because it might detract from the stealth itself. Me personally, if I'm playing as Banner and I find a taser, then I want to use it. I don't want to stash it and never see it again. So that's my guess as to why it wasn't included in the final game. However, I can't help but wonder if it might have added some excitement to these missions. Getting into combat is actually quite enjoyable as Banner, so maybe a small weapon might have added a boost, although admittedly at the cost of thematics, as Banner isn't meant to be a fighter. I should emphasize though that this is mostly my speculation, since I wasn't able to learn much else about the inventory system, unfortunately. But after crafting the serum, Banner injects it into himself and heads to the surface. He's immediately caught, but hulks out just in time. We next fight our way through the base, but the problem of the energy shield still persists, so we have to find a way to shut it down. We'll eventually make it to the power core, but one more obstacle stands in our way, another gamma mutate named Flux.
Flux! Destroy the intruder! Sir, yes, sir!
Flux is portrayed as a very cartoonish soldier, and he spouts a bunch of cheesy but entertaining lines throughout the fight.
Oh yeah, sweetheart? I'm just as big and mean as you. That there's crazy as a bed bug. Drop me now, sweetheart. Riker needs a lab rat. You'll do nicely. Put me down, darling. Slicker than snot. How about a grapefruit?
Like with Madman, there are some fun lines I found in the files that I didn't hear in the game.
Big moves, Bubba. What is your malfunction? Keep walking, boy. You're as sorry as a snake. You could use a medic. Too bad. Sweet as pie. Well, butter my butt and call me a biscuit. That's gooder than grits. Sir, yes, sir. With pleasure, sir.
He's a funny caricature type of villain, but this isn't exactly like the comics. In his human form, he's a man named Benjamin Tibbets. General Riker manipulated him into undergoing the experiment that transformed him into Flux. He then fed Tibbets lies about the Hulk, for example, that Hulk was betraying his country and feeding government secrets to the Soviets. Riker did this to rile Flux up, before sending him to apprehend Hulk. Hulk of course wins, and both of them soon de-Hulk. Banner and Tibbets start talking, and Tibbets realizes the truth. He agrees to return with Bruce to Leonard Samson's home, Bruce a psychiatrist, but more on him in the next video. Unfortunately, Riker discovers their hideout and hauls them all back to the military base. There, he begins to experiment on both Hulk and Tibbets. As far as Hulk, Riker discovers that he can trigger his personas based on influencing certain emotions, and in the process learns that Green Hulk is the childlike persona of Bruce, while Grey Hulk is more akin to an angsty teenager. He also learns that he can manipulate Flux using his unresolved issues with his mother. So yeah, things are quite a bit different for Flux in the comics. I still think he's adapted well though, and I found it fitting that Riker shouts commands from a loudspeaker throughout our fight, but nothing about his mother, I should add.
Fire at Banner! Use your weapon, soldier! Flux! You're not weak. You will attack Banner.
The Flux fight is my favorite in the game too. While you're battling him, you need to destroy 3 terminals in the room to depower the energy shield protecting the power core. All the while, Flux will lob grenades, but you can bait them out to damage terminals as well. Once they're destroyed, you can pick up Flux and throw him into the power core to damage both of them. So I thought Flux was a well-balanced fight with some fun environmental interactiveness. Interestingly, there are a couple of cut voice lines for him that suggest he would at one point use a firearm against you.
Well, can you dodge bullets? This here's my favorite gun.
I asked Eric about this, and he told me that they were tossing around the idea for one and wrote a couple of lines for it, but cut it for reasons he can't remember. Still pretty cool to think about how this fight might have differed in that way, but I'm glad they kept it restricted to the grenades. Continuing forward, once we defeat Flux, Hulk throws him into the power core one last time, destroying it and knocking him out. This lowers the shield, so we're free to escape the base. Our next step is to pick up where we left off by returning to Alcatraz to stop the leader from further using the Gamma Orb. We fight our way deep into the depths of Alcatraz until we eventually catch up to the leader, carrying the orb. He's able to teleport away thanks to Ravage.
So, the big menace catches up. Before you get all worked up, my angry adversary, I deceived Banner, not you! So have a seat! Fine! Have it your way!
Ravage is another tough boss fight, but still manageable. Once we start, a text prompt informs us that Ravage is a tactical fighter and that we shouldn't leave ourselves open. That's handy because Ravage can parry our attacks. However, I could never get a good feel for when he could do this versus when he couldn't, because there were times he'd get me mid-combo. Even still, Ravage is a fun fight as you look for openings to get a full combo in yourself. He'll also do a ground pound every now and again, which drops debris from the ceiling that you can use against him. His first phase isn't too bad, it's mostly his second phase where things get intense. Not only are you fighting an enraged Ravage, but a couple of Gamma soldiers teleport in to join him, this time wielding energy rifles. These guys suck, and they were my least favorite enemy type in the game. Their rapid-fire shots can lock you in place until their clip runs out, and since you're so slow, it can be tough to get out of the way. So just two of these guys added a bunch of pressure to the fight. You can get Ravage to walk into the gunfire sometimes, which is fun, but otherwise they were a significant hazard. Once we beat Ravage, both he and Hulk revert to human form, and the two talk.
I'm sorry, Bruce. Through my treachery, I've handed the leader all that he needs to create his army. We're both victims of our desperation, our curses.
I've been a victim too long.
The leader has moved the orb to his base of operations, New Freehold. We must...
This is my battle. The energy is my responsibility. I'm taking it back.
I really like the Dr. Crawford character, and I feel like this is where the story is at its best. He's not a bad guy necessarily, just in a desperate situation. He feels regret for the choices he made, but you get why he did it. I wish we got a little bit more time with Crawford to fill out this character more, but even still, I like his usage in the game. Continuing on, Bruce teleports to the leader's lair. We have to sneak our way through in hopes of reclaiming the orb. It doesn't take long for that plan to be thwarted when we're intercepted by both Half-Life and Madman.
I've been waiting for a shot at the title, and here you are.
Thought you were done with me. Think again.
Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
We're now on to our next fight against two bosses at once. Each one was tough on their own, so this fight was tricky. What I found was best was to focus down Madman and just use any debris I could to ward off Half-Life. Once you've dealt enough collective damage, Madman will retreat, leaving only Half-Life. He goes back to full health, but at least we get some health drops for ourselves too. The first time I did this fight, I really struggled because there wasn't much debris in the area for me to use against him, so I cheesed Sonic Claps. What I didn't realize was that you can create debris yourself if you just slam the ground. That's probably what the Ravage fight was supposed to teach me, but I assumed only he could do it, so that went completely over my head. Once you realize you can do that, Half-Life is so much easier to defeat, and once we do so, we're now able to confront the leader.
Looking for this? Here, take it. I detest violence.
Clumsy scientist.
What have you done to me?
Why, I've killed the Hulk! Oh, you are no longer a monster, Bruce Banner. Just an underachieving scientist. You're cured. Now leave.
Bruce isn't going to back down though, so our goal now is to reach the orb and power back up. The leader will attack us, but he goes easy on us. You'll maybe get hit once or twice, but you can pretty quickly run to each power switch and reach the orb. Honestly, this little section probably could have been cut since it feels so pointless, but I get that you'd want Banner to play a role in the final fight since the game has revolved around both him and Hulk. But anyway, now that we're powered back up, it's time for the real boss fight. Before we do that though, let's look at the leader's comic origin, especially because the game tells us nothing about him. So in the comics, he begins as a normal man named Samuel Stearns. Interestingly, he was actually an uneducated man working as a laborer at a chemical research plant. Things changed when one of its gamma ray cylinders randomly exploded, dousing him in gamma. The effects were the opposite of Hulk though. Stearns didn't gain strength, but instead, his intellect grew immensely, hence the giant head. With his newfound power, he naturally decided he should take over the world. Like plenty of other villains, he wishes to experiment on the Hulk in order to learn the secrets of their gamma mutations and why they differ. Since Leader isn't a fighter, he often sends other villains to do his dirty work, so it's fitting that in the game, we've seen multiple other supervillains operate as henchmen for him. Still, Leader can throw down if necessary, thanks to some additional powers. One is that he can mind control someone if he touches them, although this doesn't work on gamma mutates like the Hulk. However, he can still use mind games, such as in one comic where he makes himself appear like a giant. He can also perform psionic blasts, which we'll see him use in the game in a moment. He also invented a matter transporter, basically a teleporter, which I assume is how he teleports around during gameplay. Speaking of which, let's look at his boss fight. To start with, Joe Fixit has a funny, leader-specific line if you're playing as him.
Oh, look at the size of your head!
The leader is a fitting final boss since he has a lot of attack variety and is quite challenging overall. His smarts are also on display through a ranged strategy since he actively tries to keep his distance. This made the leader quite a tough battle for me, and I had to redo this fight a few times, and it mostly took learning his attack patterns. The simplest one is his psionic laser attack, which if you bait it out and sidestep it, you can very easily get some hits in. Leader will also do a spinning laser attack, which you can avoid by either jumping over it or waiting in the back where its range ends. To showcase his mind games, he creates illusions of himself. One of them is the real one, so your job is to find him. Although I actually preferred finding the illusions, since they have low health and each time you defeat one, you get a health orb, which was very helpful. Still, there's a lot to juggle, and with him constantly teleporting around, when you finally do hit him, he instantly falls so you can't really combo him. It's tough to get significant damage or momentum on him, so it takes a while to actually deplete his health. This is only phase 1 by the way. In phase 2, those annoying ass rifle soldiers join the fight, making this even more intense. With the Hulk being an up-close brawler, it feels like we're at a big disadvantage against so many ranged enemies, especially with our limited mobility. The challenge itself is fine, my main problem is how long the fight is, since it takes so long to deal damage. Plus, if you lose, it feels really punishing having to work your way back through it. Not to mention if you run out of continues, you'll have to do that banner section again, which just adds to the tedium. So I'm a bit mixed on this fight. I like the mechanics and the variety of attacks, as well as that it's a fight that makes you think, since that's fitting for a battle against the leader. However, I think it's a bit too overlong and meticulous. But once we defeat him, Hulk destroys the orb with a powerful stomp, and the explosive gamma from it begins to bring down the facility. Leader teleports away, leaving us alone. This isn't the end of the game, since we now have to escape before we're caved in. Something cool is the way the camera is slightly tilted for this section, making it feel like the map is askew or sinking, which I thought was a great thematic addition. It's also funny seeing all the gamma soldiers fleeing beside us instead of trying to fight. That excludes one enemy though, as we encounter Madman one last time, living up to his name and blocking our path. I guess this technically makes him our final boss too. Even still, he's a pretty straightforward slugfest, and this is probably the easiest fight in the game, which I think is good after the leader fight. After we take him down, we're free to use the teleporter and escape. From here, we're given our final cinematic, a montage that shows us what each character has been up to since then. We first see Crawford attempting to recreate his gamma orb, but with no success. We then see Flux on a gurney while Riker analyzes some gamma cells. I'm actually not really sure what he's looking at here, but he refers to it as the keys to the Gamma Kingdom, which can't be good. He also says something similar in the comics after discovering that he can manipulate Flux using those unresolved issues with his mother, calling it the key to the Gamma Castle. Regardless, this cliffhanger will sadly remain unresolved. Lastly, we see Bruce in the desert attempting to hitch a ride somewhere. He's back on the run as a drifter, so a bit of a tragic end for Bruce, since even in winning, he still loses. Bruce is a very tragic character, so I think this was the right note to end on. But that concludes the Hulk movie game. Overall, I thought the story was pretty good, but I did have some issues. Let's start with the positives though. I really like how much it draws from the comics, and I think it brings all the right Hulk vibes. Most notably, I love the plethora of villains it incorporates, both recognizable and niche. The Leader is probably the only one that casual fans might recognize, so I thought it was cool that multiple lower tier characters receive some spotlight too. The art style really boosts the comic vibe as well. Another detail I like about it is the shininess and glow each character seems to have, almost like everything is irradiated. The art style came off quite creepy at times too, not only with the coloring, but things like proportions of faces and their all-white eyes. I like this though because it made enemies appear scarier and more intimidating, which paired nicely with the challenging fights. Overall, the art style and story both succeeded in blending notes from the movie and comics, and that synergy makes this game feel like an excellent hybrid. But getting into the negatives, it's mostly to do with story gaps I was experiencing. To start, I love the comic characters that were introduced, but they always come out of nowhere and with no build-up, with the exclusion of Crawford to a degree. The rest of the time, we just walk into a room and there's this mysterious villain. I wish each one had a little more depth or introduction because we leave the game knowing nothing about them, aside from their powers. There's very little context about why they're here in the first place, and we're pretty much just left to assume that they're working for the Leader for one reason or another. Even the Leader himself feels a bit out of nowhere. Betty mentions him midway through the game, but it doesn't really spur any kind of reaction. I don't think we ever learn his exact motivations in-game, we just know he's using the orb for nefarious plans. On the plus side, I do like that he and Riker parallel each other, both essentially trying to do the same things, but separately, so they work as dual antagonists. Although bouncing between them felt a bit random, and it wasn't clear if they were working together in some way, or if we're really just hopping between the two factions. So story context in general is my biggest complaint. Funnily enough, another issue I had was that the load screen constantly spoiled the next cutscene ahead of time. For example, after rescuing Betty from Madman, we get the load screen that tells us that Riker has captured us and injected us with a drug, and this is before we even reach Gamma Base with Betty. So the load screen quite often took away the edge of a surprise moment. But to sum up my thoughts on the story, I think it overall serves its purpose and provides some cool moments. It's missing a substantial amount of context between levels, but the art style and characters are so cool that I don't really mind in the grand scheme of things. While we're on the topic of the story though, I also want to briefly discuss some of the ideas and characters that Eric Holmes had hoped to incorporate into the game, but ultimately didn't have time to.
The things I remember cutting and being more painful were there was certain characters I wanted to put into the game, and specifically some cameo stuff, because I felt really strongly that that was a really good part of the Spider-Man game, and that it was Marvel, right? And you were aware it wasn't just Spider-Man, Venom, and Carnage, you know. There's a host of other characters that turn up in there. And I remember going through, I went through the documents again today, and I want to have a boss fight with Captain America at the end.
That would have been so cool. Was that instead of, I think it's Madman at the end that kind of blocks your escape? I guess would it have been before Leader, or do you remember roughly how you're wanting to incorporate Cap?
I feel like it was almost like a post-credits thing in a way, and it was like he finishes the story, he's done, but then he's hunted down, and it begins again.
Wow. Oh, that would have been so cool.
And the person that's hunting him down is Cap. So it was an unexpected kind of extra fight there. There was cameos in there we wanted to have with Iron Man and Nick Fury. I know Absorbing Man was in there and he was removed. Abomination was in there at one point and removed, and of course that lets us put him in the sequel. We also had The Thing, Juggernaut. I can't remember what the heck we were thinking of doing with him, but we had MODOK in there at one point as well.
Oh, wow.
So there was a whole bunch of characters we were trying to squeeze in and see if we could just make it feel like a bigger world. Not all of them planned as interactive, but we just didn't have time. I was a young developer at the time, and I think one of the mistakes you make when you're working in design and you're trying to develop a game is one of the biggest mistakes you can make is you have too many ideas and you fall in love with so many of them. And then you think that if you push all the ideas into the game, it will be a better game because look, I've got all my ideas. But the truth is, it's about putting the right ideas into the game and eliminating ones which take away focus or ones that harmonize with the other ones. And so I did not know that on this project. I was just stuffing in as many things as I could, and I was probably very difficult for some of the project managers to work with because they're like, this guy just wants all these things and I don't have time for him. And I created a lot of stress with people about that. So I feel kind of bad about that these days. But things like trying to push in these extra characters was an example where I was just pushing and it didn't fit. It just didn't fit, and so it got cut. And it was the right thing to do to cut it. But I mean, it's fun to have the ideas and test them out and see if you can get them there.
It's really cool to think about how differently this game could have looked with all those cameos, and it's hard not to wish they were brought in. However, Eric further reinforced to me that he thinks it was the right choice to keep them out.
Doing less things lets you do the things you do better, because everyone gets a bit more time to do the smaller number of things. It's not like if we said, let's put Captain America and we'd hire 10 more guys. It would be the same people, we just fracture their time more. So by not having those things in, it gives other things a bit more oxygen to breathe.
On the topic of unused ideas, Eric also told me about where he wanted to take the sequel initially.
The thing I remember as the big theme on the next game was I was really stuck on the idea of fathers and sons. And we had this big push for his father tested on himself, and he fell on the dark side of scientific ethics and corrupted his son, and he created the dogs, right? Like these monster creatures. He seemed to have no limits on where you would take things. And a thing I thought would be really interesting would be to have Bruce start to realize he's starting to move that way as he's trying to solve things. Like, how far does he push things and what does that mean to him? So the big angle in that was realizing you're turning into your parent. At the time, it was more of a dark personal exploration, and it spoke to me at the time.
I think that could have been a really cool route to take Banner, and I wouldn't have been opposed to it in the follow-up game. Things, of course, went a different way with Hulk Ultimate Destruction once Radical had the opportunity to work with Paul Jenkins, a Hulk comic writer whose work was a big inspiration in the first game. So he was brought on, and together, he and Radical did some great work on Ultimate Destruction, which we'll discuss in the next video. But continuing forward with Hulk 1, I think the most crucial aspect of it is whether or not the gameplay succeeds, so next, let's dive deeper into that. Let's begin with the Banner missions. So to start, as I've mentioned before, I don't think they're as bad as their reputation would have you believe. In fact, I think it makes sense to include Bruce as a playable character. The comics may be called the Incredible Hulk, but we often spend a lot of time with Bruce as he struggles to overcome his transformations, even while on the run from the government. The duality between Bruce and Hulk is important, so I appreciate the Radical attempted to showcase that through gameplay. That contrast in gameplay is helpful too. Feeling the slowness and vulnerability of Banner amplifies the strength you feel when you're back in control of the Hulk. So in concept, I like the idea of having us play as Banner to get a feel for both sides of his life. I even like him as a breather between some of the more intense Hulk missions. This actually seems to be the main idea behind incorporating him into the game, which Eric Holmes describes further after I asked him about the Banner missions.
So the role I think that they played was palate cleansing, in terms of if you have a favorite food and you have a big plate of it, and then there's an infinite number of plates of it right next to it, at some point you're going to be sick of it, right? At some point you're going to not like it. For example, if it's steaks and there's broccoli, and maybe you don't even like broccoli that much, having some broccoli will let you retain your enjoyment of steak.
I see.
Variety. So we wanted to have some of that character there. There was different people who wanted different amounts of it in there. And I think if you look back there in time, stealth gameplay was becoming quite popular. Metal Gear 2 had come out, I think, not long before that, and was, an amazing game that's absolutely beloved. And the whole game is about stealth, and the whole focus is on that. And we had very limited time and resources to try to make something that was a little bit like that. I think we didn't knock it out of the park. It wasn't that exciting, and I'm glad we didn't have more of it than we had. And I think the people that worked on it did a fantastic job with the time and resources that they had. But naturally, most of our time and resources went to making Hulk a really exciting character to be. And I think if we knew at the start what we knew at the end, I think we would have made less of it. We probably have made them shorter overall, those Banner sections. But it was, we did the best with the information that we had, and it was sometimes successful.
Similar to what Eric is saying, I think there are parts of the Banner missions that work, but ultimately they overstay their welcome a bit. I appreciate a breather after the high-energy Hulk missions, but the Banner ones can go a bit long and feel quite slow. Sitting and waiting during stealth missions felt tedious, and I noticed myself start to get really antsy. If you slip up momentarily and get caught, then you're facing a very possible game over, further extending that time, which is even worse if you run out of continues. So all of those elements in combination are what I think hold the Banner missions back. Interestingly, the most fun I had with them was when I would get caught and I'd have to fight my way out of a situation, which I think reinforces the idea that I'm lacking some excitement during them. That being said, I like Radical's attempt, and I still think there exists the possibility of fun and exciting playable banner missions in a hypothetical future Hulk game. The favela chase from the 2008 movie comes to mind as something that could be kind of fun to play. So I'm not opposed to this idea being revisited in the future, but with some heavy attention to pacing and exciting moments. But now let's look at the main man, the Hulk. There are things that are working for me and things that aren't, but let's start with the positives. The biggest boon to this game is its emphasis on destructible and interactive environments. For such a linear game, you might expect the destruction to be lacking. Surprisingly, that's not the case at all. There's always some kind of object to break apart and use as a weapon, or something explosive to pick up and throw. Every interactable feels powerful, and I love the way it opens up gameplay options. This level of interactiveness and weaponization made the environment feel livelier and allowed me to improvise throughout the room. The physics system further amplifies the fun of destruction, although I have to admit it hadn't really dawned on me until after my playthrough. I think with modern games you just kind of expect it, but I recognize this was a bigger deal in the PS2 era, and I think it pays off. Destruction feels believable in the way things fly across the room, which is important in a Hulk game, so although it may be a subtle addition, it's a key one. As far as the Hulk himself, he has some good gameplay variety. He has multiple combos he can perform, all contributing differently to gameplay without feeling redundant. For example, some combos are quicker, some are more powerful, and some provide knockdown effects. As you get more advanced, you can start toying with longer combos, one of which even requires you to pause after the second hit before continuing further. That was probably the most powerful one in my opinion, but it took some time to get the feel for it since it leaves you open during the pause, but I think that allows for some good risk versus reward. On a similar note, you can charge certain attacks, and as you'd expect, the results are much more damaging on impact. This actually goes back to the beginning of the video, since this charge system was influenced by Devil May Cry, as further described by Eric Holmes in this clip.
And the second game that was the big influence was Devil May Cry. So the first Devil May Cry game had a weapon called the Ifrit gloves. So these are flaming gloves that you could, because by default Dante fights with his sword, right? And I think it was the first kind of alternate weapon you get in there. And these gloves had the ability to charge attacks. So if you just tapped attack, he would go through his poses, I think do a 4-hit combo with the gloves. But any one of those hits, you could hold down the button and he would build up power and he would hit harder and do more damage if you held it down for longer. So you got this little gambling game almost you could play with every combo, going, how much power can I put into this before something's going to come and hit me? And I thought that was perfect for the Hulk, because the Hulk's all about power. And it felt like we could do more because we could have physics effects that came off of that too, and launch characters further away, and the damage scaling part of his strength felt like it spoke to that. So I really wanted to push for us taking that core and figuring out how we build a whole character around that idea.
You can see Devil May Cry's influence in other ways too, such as with a continue system of their own, and although I personally dislike it in both games, I at least appreciate that Hulk's is much less restrictive. The Hulk combo that requires you to take a momentary pause in between feels familiar to Devil May Cry as well, which utilizes that same idea. As far as the charge system, I really like it. However, I have to admit that I didn't use it as much as I thought I would, at least within combos. It wasn't always clear to me which attacks in a combo could be charged and which ones couldn't. Also, the charge felt quite long, and even though the added damage was nice, I found it was really easy to get interrupted during it, to the point I didn't really find it worthwhile unless I had a really good opening. So I mostly utilized charging for sonic claps and jump attacks. I do want to point out though that the charge mechanic returns in Hulk Ultimate Destruction, and I think it's implemented much more intuitively there. In fact, a lot of the attacks that are in this game carry over into that one, so it's quite fun seeing their introduction here and how they were built upon. It's pretty cool because you can really see the groundwork being laid here in Hulk 2003. There are a lot of good ideas, but not everything is super refined. However, those problems are smoothed out in Hulk Ultimate Destruction. Another example of that is in locomotion. Hulk Ultimate Destruction has very fluid dashes and sprints, which of course you expect in an open world game, but I have to imagine some of that comes from what Radical learned in Hulk 2003, especially since the movement in this game is really slow. You can't sprint, and Hulk lumbers around pretty casually. If you're in a pinch, there is a dash, but I found it's better used as an opening attack to close some distance instead of as an evasive option. Jumping is usually better in that regard, but still doesn't feel all that great. So there's not much in the way of defense or evasion. Now I know this is the Hulk, someone who's going to tank a lot of damage, so I think the idea is that your best defense is a good offense, especially since defeated enemies often drop health or rage orbs. However, some of those orbs were pretty minimal, and you also fight a ton of enemies who can deal some pretty good damage, and they also take a bit longer to defeat than I expected. For example, even the basic soldiers don't go down with just a normal 3-hit combo. You have to spend a little extra time hitting them, which felt odd to me because they're supposed to be like gnats to the Hulk. Just swat them away and be done. But they can actually take some shots from you, and although that makes them a persistent challenge, it also had the downside of making the Hulk feel weaker. Another thing that contributed to that feeling was that you face a lot of waves of enemies in each level. There will be rooms or hallways where you'll defeat all the enemies and then more will keep rushing in. My issue was that I could never get a firm read on if the game was spawning enemies in infinitely and that I should push forward, or if I was supposed to beat a certain number of waves to actually clear an area. The longer I stayed to fight, the more risk I was taking on, since I wanted a good amount of health before entering the next room. So what often happened was that I usually found it better to just run to the next area, even with enemies remaining, which didn't feel great. Looking at boss fights, they were still the most challenging levels, as they should be. Even though I struggled the most with them, I liked all the bosses mechanically and think they're well developed. Still, I can't help but feel like Hulk struggles to keep pace with them a bit more than he should, since I felt like I had to play a lot more cautiously than aggressively. I also felt like I had to cheese things at times, like with grabs, which let me output damage while being invincible during the animation. So altogether, I felt quite a mix of pros and cons during my playthroughs. What this all comes down to though is, does this game make me feel like the Hulk? Yes and no, but mostly yes. Like I mentioned, he feels a bit vulnerable at times and not as strong combatively as maybe he should, but I think this is mostly due to enemies being able to take quite a beating. Ultimately though, there's enough here that I still feel like a powerful force, especially when unleashing my rage attacks. There's also some great combat variety, so things never feel too redundant, and the interactive environment really carries that feeling of power and destruction that I'm craving. So despite some drawbacks, the gameplay is succeeding overall, and I think it's a solid Hulk game. Furthermore, I was pleased to see that there are some ways to customize the challenge level to your liking if it's not matching your style, and this is via the game's extensive cheat menu. Like many games of this era, you can input a cheat code to grant you various boosts. You can do things like double your health bar, double the rate at which you regenerate health, become invulnerable, get infinite rage, etc. All of which are about what you'd expect. Even better though, you can give yourself infinite continues if you're really annoyed with that feature, and you can unlock a level select, which is especially handy if you're someone who just wants to skip all the banner missions. If you're a pro and want a greater challenge, I thought it was cool that you can input a cheat to double the enemy's health, although I personally think that's crazy. We talked a lot about Grey Hulk as well, and it's definitely the best cheat in the game. I'm honestly surprised they made it so missable, but it makes for a really awesome hidden addition. Definitely not something you would see in modern games, you'd have to pay for it. But I love that there's such an extensive cheat menu because I think whether it's your first playthrough or second playthrough, you have a lot of customization to play around with and can tailor the game to your liking. It also adds some replayability, which I always like. Once I learned about Grey Hulk, there was no way I wasn't doing a second playthrough just to hear his extra voice lines. Even with no extra gameplay changes, it felt like a totally new experience.
You think you can defeat me now?
You can test yourself further in some bonus game modes as well, of which there are 3 types. An endurance mode, where you fight waves of enemies for as long as you can survive. There's a time trial, where you fight waves of enemies as well, but you just try to survive for an allotted time. Then there's my favorite, Hulk Smash mode. Like the other modes, waves of enemies will swarm in, but your main goal is to cause as much destruction as you can. You get points for enemies defeated, as well as objects obliterated. The environment is littered with things to pick up or break, so it's a lot of fun to fully embrace your destructive nature while unleashing that fury onto enemies. There's still some extra bonus content available as well. You can view behind-the-scenes content from the movie, such as various photos of Hulk models and sets. The most interesting thing to me was the artwork, which contains some great imagery of the Hulk during moments of the film. You can also watch a trailer for the game, and my favorite moment from it is just this caption: "His size is unbelievable." Oh, I bet it is. There are also some really interesting behind-the-scenes info from people who worked on the game and the movie. We've talked a lot about the game details, so here's a sample of what it took to make the Hulk in the movie, which I thought was quite impressive.
I think in this film we really kind of hit a new level. As you can see here, as he pulls the gamma sphere, the way the cables snap back like a snake all have meaning to Aang, the director, and it's all part of the world that he's created.
In terms of achieving emotion for the character of the Hulk, I think we've set the bar very high.
You have to make the body of the Hulk, the muscles, the veins, the tendons, all that becomes performance. And so what you're seeing here is actually a concept art, and we literally take the first pass on the animation, and from there we draw over it, and we try to kind of isolate and think about what happens if a human body actually went from 9 feet to 12 foot.
It's difficult to be able to do it in a way that everybody believes it.
After rewatching the film for this video, the Hulk effects hold up very well even by today's standards. The film itself has actually aged better with time too. I think back in the day, a lot of people, myself included, expected a very action-packed Hulk movie after that Super Bowl trailer. The actual film is much more of a slow burn drama focused on Bruce, so I think that contrast of expectations versus reality is likely what hurt it. It's worth rewatching though, with the knowledge going in that it's more of a tragic film and that the Hulk won't significantly show up until about 45 minutes in. Still, it's very well shot and is a good film in its own right. Before we close out this section, I want to also discuss some cut content that I found interesting. In the strategy guide, there are some interviews with developers, and a couple of them mention cut ideas. For instance, gameplay programmer Brian Brandt mentions a cut grapple system that would have been used between Hulk and the larger enemies. It was apparently cut because it was slowing the game down too much and would have needed a lot of work to make it fit appropriately. It's pretty interesting that the grapples were originally planned to be more complex, but it sounds like the cut was for the best. As it stands, I like the simplicity and cinematic nature of the grabs. As far as other cut content, producer Tim Benison mentions levels and characters that were fully completed that needed to be cut. No other specifics were given, but that's quite curious. He also mentions combat with helicopter gunships that they didn't have time to pull off. The only remnants of that appear to be a moment where you throw explosive barrels at one, but that's about it. Still quite interesting. This next one isn't exactly cut content, but I think it's cool to show, and it's an alternate look at the Gamma soldiers. The leftmost image is an early concept, which looks very brutish, then the middle is a much more detailed revision, and I like how zombie-like they look. It's very creepy, and I kinda wish it remained. The rightmost image is the final version, which I still think looks good and fits with the more vibrant, cel-shaded style, so I like it as well, but that middle concept just looks so cool, I definitely wanted to show it off. This last one is quite interesting, and still a bit obscure if I'm being honest. So in Ultimate Destruction, one of the unlockable characters is Savage Banner, which in the comics is essentially the mind of the Hulk controlling the body of Banner. What's interesting is that Savage Banner was initially meant to be a playable character in this first Hulk game too, but had to be cut at the end because it was too much of a bug risk and they didn't have time to fully test it. However, a developer still went and included it in an obscure way. The problem is that nobody can seem to remember the exact method to do it. From what I could learn, it's supposedly in the One and All mission right before you fight Ravage. You're supposed to jump roughly a dozen times in a specific spot, and after doing so, Savage Banner will be available as an unlockable outfit. I spent a lot of time jumping around this area and couldn't get anything to trigger, so I can't confirm any of this to be accurate, but I thought it was worth mentioning in case anyone else wants to experiment with it further. As far as myself and Eric can tell, nobody has legitimately managed to unlock Savage Banner yet. But on that mysterious note, I think that wraps up everything I have regarding gameplay and extra content, so now let's examine the audio side of the game. As usual, we'll begin with the voice actors. Starting with Bruce Banner himself, Eric Bana from the film voices the character. He's briefly discussed in a behind-the-scenes clip, which includes him recording some lines.
We've actually worked with the talent from the film. Eric Bana, playing the character Bruce Banner, he was able to retain his character exactly. While he's doing this film, he was also doing the game for us.
Betty, my entire life infected by this disease.
Eric Holmes spoke briefly about his time working with Bana and says it was a very positive experience.
The story I can tell, I guess, is we got Eric Bana to do the voiceover.
Right.
So I got to fly to Australia and work with him for 2 days, I think maybe 3 days, on the voiceover. And so that was a really great experience. You know, he was fantastic. He put everything he had into it and was really down to earth and a really good collaborator.
Overall, I thought Eric Bana did a good job in the game. A lot of his lines were mostly his thoughts vocalized to the player, and Eric did a good job demonstrating that with readings that felt ponderous. So overall, he does a good job, and I don't have any complaints. I want to point out though that Eric Bana specifically did all the readings for Bruce Banner, not the Hulk. That credit belongs to Greg Robertson, who interestingly enough was also the game's sound director and composer. I thought it was really cool that he pulled double duty by composing the game and voicing Hulk, and I think he did a good job with the Hulk's grunts and roars throughout. We'll talk about the music shortly as well. As far as the supporting cast in the game, I have to be really honest and mention that I'm not really familiar with their other work, so I don't have any big alternate roles to point to, so I'm mostly keeping it contained to other Marvel roles. That being said, we first have Michael Dobson voicing the leader. Despite this being a relatively small role, I think Michael portrayed him well, giving him some fun and zany readings during the fight.
Do you challenge us? Never underestimate the power of the mind! Imagine, and it happens!
Outside of this Hulk game, I thought it was cool that Michael also voiced a couple of characters in Marvel Nemesis: Rise of the Imperfects, a game that I covered a while back. In that game, he voices Niles Van Rokel and Johnny Ohm, the latter of which I thought had an especially cool voice.
I do it my own time, bro. By the way, my name's Johnny Holmes. It's mind over matter, baby. I don't mind. And you don't matter.
Next up is Paul Dobson, the brother of Michael Dobson, who we just discussed. Paul voices Madman, providing a unique and fitting voice for him. I thought it was cool that Paul has voiced Dr. Doom on a couple of occasions as well, such as in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and the Fantastic Four animated series World's Greatest Heroes. Lastly, I want to call attention to Lee Talker, voicing both Half-Life and Flux. I thought those were some great voice performances as well, and I would have never guessed that the same actor portrayed them. Half-Life in particular, I was sure was being voiced by Mark Hamill, but I was very wrong after looking it up. Both Half-Life and Flux have a very cartoonish style to their voices, but they're also very fitting, with Half-Life being one of my favorite voices in the game.
You're suffering. You've got a human parasite. You're not angry enough to finish me. Don't deny me. Come here. Someone's being careless.
Outside of Hulk, Lee has an extensive resume of roles that vary quite a bit, but from what I can tell, it seems to skew more towards kids shows. For example, a show called Slugterra, where he voices Pronto, as well as Dr. Frog in a show called The League of Super Evil. These seem to be his most prominent appearances, at least from my limited IMDb research. Overall though, I thought the voice acting was excellent pretty much across the board, since everyone felt unique and stood out in their own way. Again, the robust characters are a huge standout in this game, and the great voice acting further accentuated that novelty. But let's next continue on to the music, composed by Greg Robertson. What I'll do next is play a few different gameplay clips that contain both some background music as well as gameplay sound effects so you get a good idea of the overall sound design. To give some thoughts ahead of the clips, I want to say that I thought the sound effects were stellar, giving some great oomph to every attack and object to really sell the power of the Hulk. The music was good too, providing some subtle ambience to each mission. What I liked about it most was that it felt sort of distorted. I'm not really sure how to describe it specifically, but it felt like it demonstrated the out-of-control nature of Banner and Hulk, providing some panicked and dissociated vibes, but take a listen for yourself.
Get her now! Threat located on the roof. Whoa! Here's another one. Fire! No more, Mr. Nice Guy! Get over here! Tracking on Alpha Key 889.
Hold it. Hold it. I didn't know I had that in me. You're hurting me. Don't move.
I need backup.
This is one big mistake.
So I thought the overall sound design was very strong. The background music provided good ambience while giving off subtle, unsettling vibes, then the booming sound effects made the combat feel very impactful, like you'd expect from the Hulk. So I was very pleased with the audio element. Radical Entertainment's Hulk 2003 was an excellent step in the right direction for Hulk. As we discussed earlier, he had some other game appearances prior to this, but none really captured the feeling of being the Hulk. This game succeeds in getting you in the purple pants and smashing to your heart's desire in a significant way. Not everything is perfect, but it builds an incredible foundation for future games to build upon. As I've mentioned, I've enjoyed seeing the degree this game was expanded on in Hulk Ultimate Destruction. That game is the fan favorite amongst Hulk games, but Hulk 2003 still stands as a solid title itself. One of my favorite aspects of this Hulk game, and it's even something I think it has over Ultimate Destruction, is its emphasis on the comics. Ultimate Destruction pulls from the comics too, but the villains that the 2003 game incorporates, combined with the cel-shaded art style, really nails the feeling of playing through a comic book video game. This game has a very unique style that still looks great today, and I think Hulk 2003 is a game worth revisiting if you want to get that comic booky Hulk experience in a more linear fashion. It's also challenging in a different way compared to Ultimate Destruction. Ultimate Destruction feels extremely fast-paced, and a lot of the challenge is keeping up the pressure and making quick decisions on the fly. Hulk 2003, on the other hand, is slower paced and more methodical. You have to time your attacks more precisely and really monitor what the enemies are doing moment to moment. I personally liked this, but I know that type of challenge will appeal to certain players over others, but again, there's still some great customization potential via the cheats if you want a more casual experience. Either way, I really like how this game still stands on its own amongst other Hulk games, even in the shadow of Ultimate Destruction. Unsurprisingly, this game was a commercial success, and it's been reported that by April 2004, it had already sold 2 million copies. Naturally, Radical then jumped into their follow-up game, Hulk Ultimate Destruction, the game we'll be discussing next on the channel. Even better, Eric Holmes was kind enough to talk with me about that game too, so I'm really excited to share those details there. But if you're curious about what we'll be discussing beyond that on the channel, well, I'm still planning on covering Miles Morales, but I had to push it back a bit. I'm currently targeting February, so I can still devote some decent time to it without rushing it out. As always, I want to thank everyone who's supporting me on YouTube memberships and Patreon. It means the world to me that you're willing to engage with the channel even further, so thank you so much. But I think that covers it for today's video. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you again when we discuss Hulk Ultimate Destruction.